Hello, everyone. I'm Shruti Kumtekar, Marketing Manager at Cloves. Thank you for joining us in our Cloves monthly webinar. Today, we will be discussing AD group request and attestation in ServiceNow. Here's the agenda. I'm going to take a couple of minutes to go through housekeeping, talk about Cloves, followed by a presentation on AD group request and attestation, and finally the Q&A. This webinar will be recorded and you will be able to access it later. For Q&A, you're on mute, and if you have any questions, please use the Q&A section in your Zoom control panel, and our panelists will answer them. If you have any questions that are not directly related to the webinar, please email me at shruti@closing.com or sales@closing.com. Our social media channels are listed here, and you can access our previous webinars at our Cloves YouTube channel. A little about Cloves. We are a ServiceNow partner since 2011, based out of Santa Clara, very close to the ServiceNow headquarters. We are a full ServiceNow shop with 150 plus customers and close to 50 consultants, and we have been executing projects globally. In terms of services, we provide end-to-end services, and our focus this year has been on customer service management, end-user portals, and mostly HR service management. Our panelists today are Christian Kim and Darla Wolf, both ServiceNow technical consultants at Cloves. Christian, looking forward to this webinar. I will stop sharing at this point and let you take over.
Hi, good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. Christian here. Shruti, thank you for the introduction. If you had missed that, I've been a consultant here at Cloves for a little over 2.5 years now. I've worked with over 30 clients, quite a variety here in the Bay Area and also throughout the US. Prior to that, I've had about 7 years of experience in IT. I've had the opportunity to work on a few different teams. So I've seen the desktop support side to client services to even infrastructure. Leading into today's discussion on AD, Active Directory group request and attestation, I'll just quickly highlight a couple of items that we're going to discuss. So first of all, we'll go through a background as to why this was needed in the first place. Go through the requirements. I'll highlight some keywords. And then we'll review the architecture. I'll jump into a short demo, and then we'll come back into some additional slides. So throughout the demo, if you have any questions, go ahead and send them into the Q&A panel. I will briefly stop throughout just to address any questions. All right. So first and foremost, the background and why. So we recently finished this project for a fairly large company. They have over 8,000 users. They span globally across the world. And they came into a situation where they were frequently receiving requests to have new Active Directory groups created. And their forest is relatively large. It's actually quite a complex forest. And so what they were finding is that they're taking quite a bit of time away from their infrastructure guys to create these AD groups. And a lot of it was done via email. So there's this situation where they had some tracked via email, some tracked via ServiceNow tickets. It wasn't a consistent experience. They've been a longtime ServiceNow customer, so from the early ages of ServiceNow until today. So there was a heavy user base, right? But they weren't realizing it to the max capacity. But on top of that, to help keep costs minimal, they want to utilize ServiceNow and in-source some of the development. So here are some key requirements of this project. One, they want to have the ability to create security and distribution groups. with an overall simple to use user experience, something that they're more highly accustomed to. Second, they needed to have the ability to set the group manager during this creation, also within ServiceNow. Third, have the ability to add and remove users to existing groups. Now I'll go into a little bit more details of how we built this when it comes to the key components. And then the last piece of this is they wanted to trigger an attestation, which is an audit for each of the groups. So each of when the group would get created, they wanted to allow the creator to specify an audit schedule, right? That can occur quarterly, monthly, yearly, annually, to any schedule as they wish, so that the group manager would be notified and would also have an easy to use interface to basically say, yes, this person is part of my group or is not. So let's go ahead and remove them. With all these items, we came up with a solution, utilize ServiceNow with orchestration, driven by the service catalog and workflows. Okay. So I wanted just to highlight some keywords, as I'll be using these quite a bit throughout the demo. Orchestration. This is an add-on available from ServiceNow. It's designed to automate simple or complex multi-system tasks or remote services. There are a variety of quote-unquote activity packs that provide different functionality within orchestration. So with this project, we utilize the Active Directory activity pack for this one, but you can see it's not limited to just Active Directory. We can tap into Azure AD, PowerShell, SCCM, and Workday. Organizational unit, also known as an OU. Just think of this as a subdivision within Active Directory, where you can store computers, users, groups, so on and so forth. A mid server. This is a server that sits in between your network environment and ServiceNow. It facilitates the communication and movement of data in between the platform, so that it's not just a direct connection from ServiceNow into your environment. PowerShell, scripting language integrated into the .NET framework. You know, we have to thank Microsoft for this one. Without PowerShell, many of the activities would not process. And then attestation. I touched a bit about this a little bit earlier, but think of it as an audit, right? A confirmation in this case of group membership. Okay. Just taking a quick moment to check on the Q&A. No questions yet, so I'll move on forward. This is a slide showing the architecture at a very high level, mapped out between ServiceNow. This is your, oops, went ahead a little bit, sorry about that. This is your firewall, right? And the communication, and this is the mid server, right? So in between the ServiceNow and your instances, you have this mid server that utilizes the orchestration and communicates to your Active Directory using PowerShell. Okay. Take another moment just to pause really quick for any Q&A. Right. It's a pretty straightforward setup and configuration when it comes to setting up a mid server, enabling the orchestration package. ServiceNow did a very great job of providing a fairly simple install process. Your mid server is very light, so it can be a VM. There are install packages for Linux or Windows, either 32-bit or 64-bit. And once you install that, you know, they provide a fairly simple UI to set up the credentials and configuration. Okay, So I'm just going to highlight some key components again in order for all this to work. So we have orchestration, which is Active Directory pack. The mid server, as I mentioned, you only need one in this case. A VM is sufficient enough to power the orchestration activities. A PowerShell admin. So we are not PowerShell gurus. Whenever we do these deployments, we ask that we do have an SME from your side who can provide the PowerShell, because what we found is that environments can vary quite a bit. We have scheduled jobs that pull in the Active Directory groups into ServiceNow. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the requirements was to have the ability to add or remove users to groups. Well, in ServiceNow, you only have one table, which is the assignment groups. We wanted to have a separation from those assignment groups to the groups in Active Directory. So what we've done is we built another custom table to store all of these groups defined within a specific OU of their forest. We didn't open it up at the top level, because then that would just pull all the OUs. That can be catastrophic. We recommend defining a specific OU, so then it's not cluttered within your forest. So with this schedule job, we're pulling in the groups via an LDAP connection, and we're staging them into this table. So then when you go back to the UI, which I'll show shortly in the demo, you can quickly reference each of these groups, and with some trickery, you're able to pull in the group members as well. So then you can see who is part of that group and who isn't. For the attestation and the group members, I just talked about the supporting and staging tables for this one. So we do need a table for the groups themselves, another table to contain the group members. We have a separate application or module built for the attestation that ties all this in together. Credentials. So starting off with credentials, you'll need one with right capabilities for orchestration. I'll show you what this looks like in the demo. And then when it comes to setting up your mid server, so the mid server requires a separate username and password. This is typically done with a locally provisioned account. You would have to then grant that account the mid server role. And that's what allows the username to communicate between the install package and ServiceNow. Okay, and then we have a couple of workflows that are driving all of this, all these items going forward. So we have one robust workflow for the AD group request, and then we have another one for the attestation. So you may ask, why do we have a workflow for the attestation? Well, again, that is based on the schedule of the attestation, right? If it's a quarterly attestation, we have one that runs every quarter. If we have one annually, we have a part of that workflow to check every 365 days. So I do have a couple of questions that came in. So one question that came up is, what issues do you face and how much time does it take to configure? A couple of items that we ran into was mostly around the PowerShell, right? Again, because we are not PowerShell experts, I can only write so much PowerShell before I need help. We did have to spend quite a bit of time to test, first of all, can we write to the OU in Active Directory, right? A couple other items we ran into was setting the managed by attribute. Otherwise, those are most of our trials and tribulations when it came to PowerShell. Configuration in itself, this I'd have to say would vary. The project spanned quite a bit sometime because there were some requirements that changed throughout the project, but also it depends on the availability of the resources, right? We there are some times where, I mean, the resources that we worked with were tied into other projects, or you know, we ran into some issues. It ultimately just depends on the environment and the availability. The next question that came into was, why do we need a custom table? We decided to use a custom table to keep this separate from the assignment groups. One follow-up question that came in is, why didn't we just add a flag to display within ServiceNow for the assignment group? That was touching, well, let's put it this way. This project is separate from their IT day-to-day usage. So we wanted to make this as less intrusive as possible, right? We didn't want to interface or have to make any changes to the assignment groups. We had very specific requirements to keep this separate from the assignment groups, because they already were using some custom attributes already for their assignment groups. They're pulling in a number of groups from LDAP that had that had some I guess special use cases, I guess, to put it that way. But if you're, I mean, you're absolutely right, Ashton. So if you wanted to, you can add this all into the same group table, but we just had very clear specifications to keep it separate in that case. Okay. Great. So moving on. All right, so now we'll move on to the demo. I want to just make a quick note. This demo is not going to be fully functional because our test environment is unfortunately down. We're having some issues with our own mid servers, so we have to pretty much do a refresh. Okay, so starting off with the demo. The requirements for the AD group request is that it should be available internally, right? There is no discussion yet as to providing this in Service Portal or CMS. The expectation was that ITIL users will see this from their own catalog. They'll come into the item and they'll go ahead and process the order. So very simple interface coming into the application. We have the option to select, do I want to create an AD group? Do I want to add members to an existing group? Or do I want to remove users from a group? So the first option, we'll go into create an AD group. You have the option to specify the group manager, and this does a lookup to the sysuser table. The group type, we only have the option at this point to do security group. There are discussions a little bit further on to do distribution groups, but this is the first requirement. And then the name of the group. So you can test, you can add any name really into the naming convention, but we do suggest that we limit some characters, because if you start putting in special characters, we'll have to do some escaping during within the backend scripting. But in most cases, we could do test cam 01, and then we can hit order now. We have the option to specify the OU placement. This is another snag that we ran into. The client did ask, can we specify an OU if it just so happens that the requester knows? This is one of the pain points that we ran into, is that we could not specify the OU in this case. We have a global property on the back end to drop in the very specific OU, but this is more for informational purposes for the assignment group that gets assigned this after it's been assigned, after it's been sent out, to then move it to the proper OU if they wish. The next item here is the ability to trigger a group attestation. So if I select yes, I can specify the attestation date. I can set this to today. I can set it to a month ahead, a minute ahead if I wanted to. And then I can specify, I can specify the frequency of the audit. Do I want this to occur annually, monthly, one time, and quarterly? So again, this is where that backend workflow comes into place. If this option gets selected, a workflow gets kicked off on top of the one for the orchestration, and then we'll run on a reoccurring basis. Okay. I'm required to input the purpose of the group. So I need a group in AD. And then I can go ahead and add my users as I need. Once that's set, I can hit order now. And the magic of this is based on this workflow. So we're capturing some of the workflow variables. They do have a group approval. This does go to an infrastructure group just to make sure that, one, okay, we know that there's an incoming request and that we shouldn't be surprised if there's a new group within this OU. Once that gets approved, we have it break off using orchestration. Leveraging orchestration, it will first create the AD object, and then we have a processing script, and then we have a timer, just so that AD has enough time to complete the creation of the OU. Once that's done, then we go ahead and add the users to the group. We will add the manager as well. And then once that completes, we're then taking the group and then the members themselves and adding it to that separate table that we created. Once that's done, there's a check for the attestation. If it is, then it'll continue on. If not, it'll just close out. We've set in logs along the way to track if the request is being complete and if there's any issues that come back. Okay. I'm going to show you the workflow that we created for the attestation. Right. So this again checks for the frequency on it, and we have this trail off into a number of pathways. I'll show you a little bit more what this looks like on the back end for the attestation, because once one attestation gets created, we consider that as a parent. And then you can see all related children attestations afterwards. So if you set this for monthly, for example, or quarterly, right, we'll have January as the parent, and then you'll see all related and following attestations afterwards. So you'll see one for February, you'll see one for March, so on and so forth, all related to the one attestation record. All right, now coming back to the AD group request, we have also the option to add and remove members from this group. You come back and start over. Oops. So if you wanted to add or remove members, right, this is where we have the lookup to that table. I'm just setting this to the group table at the moment because I don't have any actual data to demo against. But once you select the group, you will see that it actually will autofill the group manager and all of the members themselves. So if I was to select test CKIM in this example, it will autofill from that custom table, the group manager. And then we have some scripts that will auto-populate from the user table into the members here. So you'll already see all the members that are currently active in that group. You can simply add additional users, hit submit, and then it'll spin off the workflow again. It will not re-add the existing members. It will only attach any of the new members to that group. And it's relatively similar for the removal of members as well. It'll also autofill with the group manager. You'll have your, say, 5 or 6 members selected already on the right side. All you need to do is just remove the users from that list, hit order, and it will recognize the delta or the difference between the members and the members in Active Directory, and then proceed to remove them from the group as well. Okay. All right. So a couple of things I just wanted to show you when you're working with orchestration and mid servers in ServiceNow. A couple of things that you'll need. Oh, wait. Well, actually, let me come to the group attestation first, and then I'll walk you through the orchestration and the mid server configuration. So let's say we've gone ahead and we've created the AD group, and yes, we did want an attestation. Once the catalog gets fulfilled, a new record is added to the group attestation record table. So if I come into here, you'll see the information that was provided. So the group manager will get an email notification that says you have an attestation for this group, for one of your groups. Please complete following this link. And you'll be brought to the backend form, right, the ITIL view of this record. And you'll see exactly this. You'll see the group that you own, the description. So I have an attestation for Tessie Kim, right? And then you'll see a list of all the members that are part of that group. So if I had, let's just pick someone from here, right? We can fill this in with a few other users, and this will be automated for you, by the way. Okay. So I will come into here, and my default options were yes, keep active. If I double click here, I have the option to remove the user, or I can add a new member. So the add member feature was added a little bit later on in the requirements, but it was mostly either keep the user or remove them. If I select no from this user and then hit update, a business rule will trigger a workflow in the backend to remove that user from this group with an AD. I have the option to add members on the fly as well. This is kind of a backdoor, but they wanted the ability to. So if I hit add member and then update again, also triggers that workflow and then adds that user to the group. So a couple of nice features that we built into the attestation. Down below here, as I mentioned a little bit earlier on, was you'll see all your related or children attestations. If you have, again, a monthly one, you'll see, March, June, July, whatever the case is, following this parent attestation. Okay. All right. So I'll walk you through now through some of the orchestration pieces, some of the important key components, just so you can get a feel for the requirements. So I mentioned a little bit earlier on is that you'll need orchestration credentials. Coming into the credentials, you'll have to specify a username and password that has write capabilities to Active Directory. And so within the workflow, you'll reference to these credentials, and that's what will be used for authentication. You have the option to specify if this credential should apply to all mid servers or just very specific ones. So if you have that one mid server, you can specify it just for this. One other thing, just as a trick, there's a tag feature in the credentials, and instead of referencing to the username for this, we went with tagging, using this tagging feature. So within the orchestration create AD object activity, you have the ability to excuse me, reference to credentials using tags, because what we found is that usernames and passwords may expire over time, or they may change. And so rather than referencing to the name, we reference to the AD tag, or the tag says. So it references it to as AD_credentials. All right. You don't have to use this, but it's a nice feature that's available. Coming into now the properties. So this is one property that you'll have to set for orchestration to work. You do have to specify a singular mid server for the activities. There's some cases when we moved from dev to stage to production, the orchestration was failing. And that's because we had different mid servers for each of the instances. So if you start in dev, you go into stage or your test, and then you go into production, and you have all individual separate mid servers. This is one of the properties that you should check and make sure that you specify the correct mid server. Speaking of mid servers, just a couple of notes. Another kind of a snag that we ran into is that this client had different mid servers for each of their instances. The first two mid servers worked great. They were set specifically to each of the instances. So dev had its own, stage had its own, prod had its own. Oddly enough, when we moved into production, the mid server was not functioning correctly. So I'd advise that you test all your mid servers, or if anything, create new mid servers when you're going to each instance, because there was quite a bit of troubleshooting that we had to go through, but it ended up being the mid server. It's fairly simple just to spin one up and then install the package, get it to talk to ServiceNow, tag the credentials to it, and then your orchestration will work. So it's just kind of odd how the production one wasn't working. And now going into the mid servers, this is what I mentioned a bit earlier on, is the different packages that are available. So you have a 32-bit, 64-bit for Linux and Windows. You will need to RDP into that VM and then access this package. If you can send it to the VM, perfectly fine. Otherwise, you can log in using that VM and then just download the package. There is an install.batch file that you need to execute. That brings up a small UI that will ask for the instance name and then the credentials. So that locally provided account mentioned earlier on. So for this example, I would input demo2close as the instance name, and then I would put in my username and password. I do have one question that came through. And this is just in regards to the orchestration. Just highlighting what I mentioned earlier on, is that you should have one mid server per environment. All right. So we'll lead back into the slides. Let me just pause here for any more questions before I get back. Doesn't seem like there's anything else. All right. So coming back to the slides. Oops. I just wanted to touch on a few other use cases for orchestration. There's password resets, onboarding, offboarding of employees. I mentioned a little bit earlier on the integration with Workday. Configuration automation, some network automation, Hadoop, and managed file transfer. So it's not limited to again, the activity packages that we have. We can leverage web services and a number of other connection paths from ServiceNow to your instance. All right, so I will now leave it up and open to Q&A. That wraps it up for our demo and discussion for Active Directory group creation and attestation. I have my contact information provided here. You can reach out to me via email or add me on LinkedIn. All right, so I had one question to go back to the first slide. Sure, so that would be, For Gail, is this the slide that you're looking for, or should I move forward to the next one? While I wait for an answer, I had another question that came up as, have I encountered AD failures when doing bulk updates due to timeouts or being busy? Up to this point, because I wouldn't say that this is heavily used to that extent yet, but you know, if you are seeing any hiccups or hangs, there is a module within ServiceNow called the ECCQ, in which you can check the logs to see if any jobs are taking much longer than they are. So again, we added a little bit of timers in place to the workflows just to slow down the creation so that AD has enough time to catch up. All right, Ashton, hopefully that answers your question. The next question that came up was, what technology is the mid server built upon? Can you elaborate a little bit on that one, Laura? Otherwise, other than requiring just a very simple VM, the install package will make the communication between your ServiceNow instance and your systems. So it is a running service. We did have to specify the same, let's see, credential that we use for the write capabilities to that service. Otherwise, using the login user for that VM was failing the orchestration activities. So that same credential that we used for the Windows orchestration, we had to set that as the login user for that service. Okay, let's see. This is based on AD being busy. Okay, so for Ashton, coming back to that one, is this based, this is based on AD being busy itself. We tried to update 30 plus records in AD at once. Then yes, that could quite add a some latency, I guess, to Active Directory. I'd actually like to further discuss with you to understand your environment and see what we can do to get around that. But it sounds like your instance is quite busy. Oops, let me come back to that. All right, so for Laura, is it service based? So is this referring to the mid server? Are the services available through .NET? I think we'd have to come back with, we'd have to follow up, I think, on that topic. I mean, I could walk through a little bit thoroughly into how a mid server is configured and managed. But feel free to reach me through email. Okay. Next question that came through is, do we pass the object's sysid to PowerShell commands, or do we use another property? So during the run script, we are passing the name over into the PowerShell. And we have not ran into issues thus far being renamed yet, but in the case that OU is changed, then we would have to update the workflow to reflect that change. Okay. Great, these are great questions. let's see. Yes, so for Richard, Java is the backend supporting part of the AD group activity, and that's provided within the orchestration activity pack. So you won't have to touch that part. It's just a matter of adding the activity to your workflow. But thank you. All right. So I'll pause again. Are there any further questions? So for the two questions that came in, Laura and Ashton, I would actually love to discuss with you guys over email, or through just a quick call to kind of understand your environment. I'll go back to my contact information again. Otherwise, I can get it from Shruti.
Okay. So, anybody else, if you have any questions, please go ahead and use your Q&A control panel. And if we don't have any more questions coming up, then thank you once again, Christian and Darla, and thanks everyone for attending. If there are any specific topics you would like for us to cover in our upcoming monthly webinars, please do send me a note at Shruti, SHRUTI @closing.com, and we will try our best to present on them. And see you all, everybody, next month for our next close webinar. Thanks, Christian.
Great, thank you, everybody.